I wanted to give you a little bit of information about me because I don't happen to know all of you, and I thought you might wonder who on earth I am, and I just will put this slide up. I will not be talking about myself all that much, but it's a little bit about where I have served in our amazing, wonderful annual conference and a couple of the trustee roles I've enjoyed serving in over the years. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you better tonight and hearing about your experiences as well. I wanted to begin tonight by sharing in an opening prayer, and I thought we could pray this together wherever you find yourself tonight. If you want to pray it aloud with me or silently, let's all center ourselves in this time of prayer. God, you've given us responsibility for our local churches and for all who meet there to serve, worship, study, and fellowship together. Help us take up this responsibility with faithfulness and integrity, respecting the gifts that our co-workers bring to our common endeavors. Help us to be aware of your Spirit with us in this session, so that the teaching and learning before us will be infused with the values we proclaim. We commit ourselves to being faithful stewards of all you have entrusted to us. We know you are with us now, as you have been throughout our lives. And so we go forward with the confidence of disciples of Jesus Christ, our Lord, in whose name we pray. Amen. It's a pretty small call tonight, so these ground rules are not as essential compared to if we had 40 people. But I did suggest that we just keep ourselves muted unless we're speaking and raise our hands. But again, in a small group, I'm not concerned too much about the logistics of that. And if you have some really detailed, specific concern about the Board of Trustees, I want to offer that I'll stay online after. We can talk about it. If it's something that might bore everybody else to tears, just save it and we'll talk later. I'm going to just move right along and say that I recommend, if you're wondering where to begin, I recommend this 2016 booklet produced by Cokesbury. You might be familiar with this entire series. This one that relates to our work is Trustees, Managing the Resources of the Congregation. It's really helpful, and it covers the responsibilities of trustees, and there's a little section on how to get organized for the year. And if you're chairing the trustees, that will be pretty helpful. And there's information about when to get outside help. It could be legal help. That seems to come up an awful lot. I went ahead and posted in the chat just before the meeting started a link to this booklet. And of course, I know you're going to want to buy one from Cokesbury, but I thought if it helped to have one sooner, you could see this and understand a little bit about what I am drawing from, because I am referring to this extensively tonight. And I did want you to have it. I've also put in the chat a bunch of other links that we're going to look at tonight. And I just wanted those to be there because you can always scroll up and find them. And some of those documents, you might want to download them and save them there on your end in case the permissions or sharings get changed and that they're not there later on, but they're there tonight. So I hope you'll take the opportunity to download some of those documents from the General Counsel for Finance and Administration and some other documents. A couple of things about the trustees generally is we trustees have responsibility for property. I think you probably knew that. It's overseeing and maintaining, supervising all of our local church property, including the parsonage. And in conjunction with the pastor, we are responsible for all the use of the church building and grounds. A fun one is receiving and administering gifts that are made to the congregation. And you've probably experienced this. Someone wants to give shares, or they want to give some land, or they want to give something that you could sell. And in that case, there are some guidelines on how to do that. And it means you can maybe have some additional funds for ministry. if you're able to sell those. Sometimes it's something that you're going to keep permanently if it's a trust. Insurance, it's a huge topic. Ensuring the church and parsonage and grounds adequately is very important. We'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later in our presentation tonight. And working on a budget and submitting that to the Committee on Finance so that it can be considered with all the other budgetary requests for the church. I'm going to pause for a quick second. I think someone else is trying to get on, and I figured I would have trouble. I am so not an expert at this. I want to be sure that I let people in and don't miss anybody if they're trying to get in. I'm coming back to the share. Tonight, if you have any questions, just really, you can interrupt me. You'll see that it doesn't take much to throw me off of my game with hosting Zoom. I think, like you, I've been on hundreds of these, but it's been more as a passive participant over the years. So I'm trying to up my game here. Most of the work of the trustees is governed by the discipline. And I included in the chat a link to the free version of the Book of Discipline that you can get online. It's really helpful. Not everyone is going to want to own a hard copy of the Book of Discipline, and you may have other trustees who would like to look things up and understand. So please feel free to share this link that is there in the tips section. You can access this online for free. The sections that are most relevant to our work are going to start at paragraph 2525, and it keeps going. So that's page 749, and it makes for really interesting reading. If you have insomnia and you need some aids there near bedtime, some of those sections can be pretty dull, but they're also pretty enlightening. And when you have an issue in the church, turn to this, because the guidelines in the Book of Discipline they guide our work as trustees. This is lengthy, and I wanted to share it because I was so impressed by this. It comes right out of the trustee guidelines booklet. And I was warned by my 17-year-old. He said, now, you know, the first rule of these slides is you never want to have paragraphs up on the screen. I said, I know that. I'm going to make an exception for this one thing tonight. And that is the biblical grounding. And it's really interesting to me to see how the work of stewarding the resources of the congregation, the building, have been part of the work of people of faith for millennia. So let me just share this, and this is the only time I'm going to be reading you a paragraph, and it's a couple of pages, so bear with me. The primary purpose of the church building and facilities is to enable the vision and ministry of the congregation. Good stewardship, common sense, and prudence dictate that the church, parsonage, facilities, property, equipment, furnishings, and other physical property be well maintained. A physical plant that is well maintained and attractive is much more welcoming, safe, and hospitable than one that shows signs of benign neglect. We honor God when we care for what has been entrusted to us, but we must be careful that the property does not become an item of worship in itself. There are numerous biblical passages that refer to the building and trappings of the tabernacle, temples, vestments, and rituals of the community of faith. The exquisite detail in Exodus 26, for example, of how the tabernacle was to be constructed indicates its significance as a setting for worship. Exodus chapters 35 through 39 describe the tabernacle to be and the joy of the people in being able to contribute so abundantly to its construction and contents that they had to be asked to stop giving. What a wonderful problem to have. Furthermore, Exodus 35 names an artisan, Bezalel, whom God has filled with divine spirit that will give him skill, ability, and knowledge for every kind of work, to be able to do the stone cutting, carving, and metalwork according to God's excellent, inspiring standards. As a further gift, he is also described as a master who has the teaching skills to apprentice other workers. There's no question that the physical site of ministry is important to God and to the community of faith. Trustees themselves may not have every one of these artistic skills, but are nevertheless entrusted to see to the proper keeping of God's house as a way to honor God and to facilitate, literally, the ministry of the local church. Thank you for bearing with me. I thought that was interesting that referred to benign neglect, and I wonder, well, what are some examples of benign neglect? These come from real life situations. They cracked a window pane while mowing, and we never got around to replacing it. The handle on the men's urinal sometimes sticks, but if you jiggle it just so, it will stop. Our road sign is covered in vines, and the letters are becoming faded, but it's mostly legible. Can you think of an example of benign neglect at your church that you might propose addressing during your term as a trustee? I couldn't help it. A couple other examples of perhaps benign neglect. One outlet cover in the choir room is missing, but that corner is rarely used. Oh, when the agent called, we renewed the insurance policy without reviewing our coverage. Those sanctuary speakers aren't working correctly, but you can still hear if you know where to sit. So some examples of benign neglect. The purpose of the church building is to be a tool that enables the local church to fulfill its vision and mission to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That is such an important part of what we're doing as trustees. We're supporting the mission of the church to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Sometimes getting organized beginning of the year is the hardest part. The Board of Trustees is to be no fewer than 3 and up to 9 members. At least a third should be women, a third should be men, and 2/3 should be professing members of the congregation. The length of term of service is up to 3 years, 3 classes with 3 folks each. That should give you about 9 people all rotating through, and non-church members can comprise 1/3 of the makeup of the Board of Trustees. And the question arises, well, what does that mean? You might have a specialized need, someone with a particular gift or talent they can offer who aren't professing members of the church, could even be a spouse, someone who's in the community who has a lot to offer, but they are not a member. So there is a provision for these members to be, non-members to be on the Board of Trustees. And because the trustees will end up probably executing legal agreements, anyone on the Board of Trustees needs to be legal age as determined by law, usually state law. And if you are on a charge owning property with other churches together jointly, you may elect charge trustees at a circuit charge conference. And your district superintendent will have to guide you through this. It's important to do that right and administer shared property in a good way that serves the community. Now, it's already near the end of January, and trustees may wonder, what should we be doing now? And we are asked and mandated to meet and organize within the first 30 days of the year. I think most of us are organized on a calendar year that starts January 1st. So we're in that time period now to have our first meeting and to elect our officers with attention given to being sure that the chair and vice chair are in different classes. And that's just for continuity of leadership so that they don't both rotate off the same year and you're left with those 2 positions being filled with folks just starting. And then it's time to orient the new trustees. It's good to walk the building, the grounds, learn about the safety features. An important one is to make sure more than one person knows where the utility cutoffs are and the traditional trouble spots that have been a problem in the church. We all have those little corners and those places where stuff just goes wrong. The more folks who can understand that and know that, the more they share in this shared ministry of being a trustee member. Also, it's good to not feel totally overwhelmed, but to organize it so that you can manage the work throughout the year, because there really are plenty of things to do, but they don't all have to be done in January, and you can space them out through the year. And if you have the trustee guidelines booklet, there's a sample of a yearly schedule that you can find on pages 13 and 14. And since we're in this period of January to March, let's just look at what the suggested tasks would be for this quarter. Organize and elect officers, review and evaluate all property and buildings, survey and inventory contents of the safe deposit box, conduct an energy audit. Well, it is cold and people are burning a lot of fuel for heat, so this is a great time of year to think about the energy audit. And then, of course, report to the church council, because as we're going to see in everything, the trustees are accountable to the church council and to the charge conference in all of our work. How do the trustees relate to the other groups in the church? We relate to the charge conference because it's the primary governing body of the church. It sets the policy and the direction for all the work and ministry of the church. Trustees act as agents of the charge conference in caring for the physical resources of the church and in taking care of legal matters. So at least annually, the trustees report to the charge conference about the state and the condition of the church's property, equipment, investments, and resources in their care. So in all matters, we trustees will receive guidance from the charge conference before acting on behalf of the church. The church council is another very important group we relate to. And if you're the chairperson of your trustees or a trustee representative, you're a member of the church council, and you're going to be responsible for taking the recommendations of the trustees to the church council for approval and action. And you're going to be responsible for taking the recommendations and directions of the church council back to the trustees. So it's a really important role. And it's good to have great communication and planning and relationships so that communication flows really smoothly between the church council and the board of trustees. You might wonder, well, why are we, I'm going to let people in the waiting room who are in the waiting room, let them join our meeting. Why are we talking about our connection to the Committee on Pastor Staff Parish Relations? That seems strange. It could be odd. I'm backing up my slide. I'm admitting, folks, I think word has gotten out that the link has been corrected, and that's wonderful. I welcome you who are just joining us. This is being recorded. You'll be able to go back and catch the first few minutes, but there's plenty more to come, and we're so glad you're here. So why do we relate to the Staff Parish Relations or Pastor Parish Relations Committee? Well, one of the common ways that we relate to them is that there's a need to work closely on the maintenance and care for the parsonage, and we might need to coordinate people who are serving, who are working to take care of the facilities, the grounds, those contractual things. If you have an outside contractor or employee, do relate to staff parish, but they also are very much part of the work of the trustees. So there is a collaboration around employing folks who clean and maintain and do grounds work. That's pretty important. There also could be a need to assist in developing personnel policies, some legal things like sexual misconduct or harassment policies. Let me admit, hello, Bruce. We also relate to the Committee on Finance because, well, a lot of times the trustees spend a sizable amount of the church budget taking care of things and maintaining things. And it's important to prepare an annual budget and present it to the Committee on Finance. And Finance is going to evaluate it in light of the entire financial picture of the church, and then make recommendations to the church council for action. So there's interaction between us trustees and several other groups in the church. And this is spelled out really nicely in the guidelines book. If you're just joining us in the chat, first, we would love for you to check in by sharing your name in the chat and your church and your district. But if you'll scroll back to the beginning of the chat, I've included links to several of the resources we're going to be talking about. So you'll have these and you can get them and download them if you wish, or save those links so you can refer to some of these booklets and guidelines. It's an awful lot to go through in a short session tonight. And I figure a lot of us will need to go back and take a look and really detail it and see how it relates to our own church. If it relates at all, or if it's really relevant, that will be good work to do after the meeting tonight. I am still admitting folks. We're so glad you're here. When I was talking to our bishop's assistant, Amy Coles, who's led this course, Trustees 101, for many years, this is one of the most important elements that she wanted to bring to my attention. And that is just the general awareness for us that the trustees are not the committee of no. Our job is not to protect the building, but to be sure the building is used. Well, those are two very different perspectives, aren't they? Are we protecting the building, or are we working to be sure the building is used? If we're going to work hard to be sure the building is used, we have a great number of responsibilities. So for the rest of our session tonight, we'll explore how to do that. How are we going to help our building be used, but do it in a responsible way? I'm just still managing our waiting room and admitting folks. We're saying hello to Josh. Let's move into a section about the use of building and grounds. The use of the building and the grounds is always decisions are made in conjunction with the pastor, and the decisions are made in support of our church council's plan for ministry. So our trustee work is not an island unto itself. We are very much collaborative, and we are accountable to our church council. We do want to always work in conjunction with the pastor. So to take us through several important topics, the topics of managing insurance coverage, how to manage use by outside groups, especially if leases and contracts are involved, and some general information if you're in a church that's thinking about a program of building. If you're thinking of buying land or building on land you have, we have some resources for you, and you don't have to go that alone. We have wonderful resources available. There's a list of proper insurance standards that we are all subject to. I'm going to put that, it's on the next slide, but it's also well explained in that link that you see there. And before we get into the different recommended, really required minimal limits on our coverage, I just want to share a little wisdom. We've heard examples around the conference that churches have sometimes agreed to rather low limits that are below the recommended floor on sexual misconduct liability. And having sat through several important and painful cases, hearing the details. I can tell you that if your agent is telling you to have a limit of, say, 100,000 or 300,000 per occurrence, you will find yourself woefully inadequately insured, because the cases I've heard about in our own conference have easily been at least $1 million and sometimes more dollars per occurrence, so per victim. And in the case of a situation when a number of people have been abused or violated, that will be several folks who easily have settlements over $1 million each. And our bishop's assistant, Amy Coles, pointed out that a claim of that size could bankrupt a local church if it has inadequate sexual misconduct liability coverage. So don't agree to underinsure yourself in this regard. And if you're careful, you will be prepared for the future, and God willing, never need to ever lean on that coverage, but it will be there. Another one to be mindful about is directors and officers liability coverage. As a trustee, you don't want your own personal assets to be in any way at risk, because you're serving the church, but you don't necessarily want to risk it all in case the church comes under some sort of lawsuit or settlement situation. So by carrying directors and officers liability coverage that is adequate, you will protect your personal assets in the event of a lawsuit against the church and its officers. So those are just important to watch for when you're looking and looking at insurance proposals. But here are some basic minimums that I just want to make you aware of. And I'm sorry that I think I actually just then clicked on the link, which was not what I wanted to do, but here it is. If you can see that, it's awfully small. My slide was a bit larger, but I want you to see this is part of the link for insurance coverage that you'll see in the chat early on. So you can go back and see this later, but you need to be aware of these minimums. So for commercial general liability, you don't want to have less than a million per occurrence and an aggregate of 3 million. You see these categories: pastoral counseling liability, 1 million. There's automobile coverage, and you may think, well, we don't have a vehicle, but if ministry is occurring and people are traveling to and from, the cases have definitely drawn in and involved churches when there have been accidents and claims. So it's pretty important to have appropriate auto coverage. You see these minimums of 1 million. There's just not a lot of argument for the appropriateness of levels lower than that. The cases I've heard are always up in the $1 million+ range. So do yourself a favor and be sure that you don't underinsure yourself. I'm going to pause for just a quick minute and get myself back to where I think I am needing to be. I'm going to stop sharing and get my slides back. Hang on for a quick second. I've shared with some of you here at the beginning of the meeting that I am definitely not an expert in managing my own Zoom meeting. So I want to just, okay, we're back to full screen, I think, aren't we? I don't think we ever went, did it ever, are we sharing? I'm not sure we are. No, I'm going to share. So I want you to see what I've got here for our meeting. And I apologize for how unwieldy I am with this. We will have an evaluation at the end, and you can just be honest that he doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to managing his own slideshow in Zoom. Okay, I'm just making sure I'm not skipping things. Yes, I did. Okay, this is a bigger slide that it's, I wanted to have it posted here in the video that shows the importance of reviewing this to be sure that you have adequate coverage levels. it's just not it's not a good place to try to cut corners and save money. And it is part of the trustees' annual report to the charge conference and be sure you confirm that you have checked coverage against the recommended minimums. So just to be honest in that work and be diligent in that work. And again, by the grace of God, you will never need to lean on those coverages, but they need to be there in the event that something does happen. A big part of what we do as trustees is work to help our facilities be used by church groups. We get requests by outside groups, and we have a responsibility in conjunction with the pastor for all use of the church buildings and grounds. One of our tasks would be to develop and keep updated a facilities use agreement. That would be a document that you have available when someone comes up to you and says, oh, we have this group or that group that we'd like to come have a meeting in the church. We'd like to use your church to prepare this, do that. If you have an agreement, you can go through that with the individual and make sure that they understand what their responsibility is. And you also maintain healthy boundaries around what you find acceptable that is in keeping with the mission of the church. And it's just a good thing to have so that everybody is treated the same, as the same facilities use agreement applies to everybody. There's a really important document that is in the chat at the very beginning of the meeting. So you'd have to scroll up, and I have a little summary on our next slide. It's from our General Counsel on Finance and Administration. Clearly, the bright legal minds there have thought of just about anything and everything that you should think about if you're going to lease your grounds or your buildings to a third party. And I can take a minute to just look at that, and I'll leave it to you to go into the serious detail as it might apply to your local congregation. Before we go to the next screen, under facilities usage, just again, there is an important role of the trustees to be involved in executing the contracts for cleaning and lawn care services. And it's a step that you ought to take to ask the staff pastor parish relations committee to authorize trustees to supervise the cleaning and lawn care of the church, if that's what the way your church is organized, and it would be important for the trustees to do that. Just know that without that delegation, that still falls on staff parish or pastor parish. But if they delegate it to you as trustees, then you can take that and run with it. That's just a small step to be aware of in the collaboration between the different committees of the church. So I wanted to share this with you and ask you to take it and go deeper after the meeting in the document that you have a link to. This is advice from our General Counsel on Finance Administration. If you're going to think about leasing your space to another group, consider whether the proposed use is compatible with the mission, ministry, and current uses of your church. I think I read an example that someone was hoping to lease to another church that needed space, but the problem was the other church wanted to come and be there exactly at the same time as the church that owns the property. Their service was always going to be at, and the decision was made that it was just not going to be compatible for two services to be going on at the same time in a rather small facility, because it would be very confusing who's coming where, who's doing what, how much are we going to run into each other and see and hear. So they had to think about that. Would it work? The General Counsel on Finance and Administration also recommends that we consult with an attorney about the proposed use and its potential legal, tax, and financial ramifications. And there are lots and lots of ramifications when we bring an outside group in. It can be wonderful partnership in ministry, but there are lots of details to be considered. So before allowing a third party to come and use your property, with the aid of an attorney, you should prepare an agreement that outlines the terms under which the third party will be able to come and use your property. That document goes into more than a dozen examples of things to consider, to look at, and to ask and understand before you do it. Because depending on who comes onto your property and what kind of money you're making, you could run afoul of zoning laws. You could run into very interesting tax situations. Now, none of this is to say it's not worth it, but you have to be aware up front so that you're not surprised if you end up running afoul of some regulation. Your insurance agent will be very interested to know about your proposed lease to an outside organization, and you're going to want to be sure that your church has adequate insurance coverage before launching into such an endeavor. Again, there's so much more detail to this. It's in the GCFA document that you have a link to in the chat. This comes up a lot. I wonder how many churches have been paying someone who's working at the church who is most likely, by the system of classification, an employee, but the church has continued to pay that individual as an independent contractor. You know why? It's cheaper. You don't have to pay the employee payroll taxes, but there is serious financial jeopardy for misclassifying an employee as an independent contractor. There's a very simple form they can fill out at the Internal Revenue Service and submit it. And lo and behold, your church will be responsible for back employment taxes paid on the individual that you should have paid all along. So it's a really, really tricky area. I think over the decades of my ministry, we've evolved. Early on, and we were prone to just say everybody's a contractor and hope it goes away. But we have understood over the decades that that's really not a very fair and just way to treat the worker. And it's certainly not, in no church wants to be faced with a surprise complaint and also the back tax bill paying the employer's portion of the income tax. So just take a close look at the way the IRS defines an independent contractor versus an employee. There is a little link there. You could just Google it. All over the internet, there are human resource websites that provide little quizzes and tests to help you figure out, oh, is this person a contractor or an employee? So you can get it right and stay clear. Some churches are thinking about building, and the trustees are very much involved with that kind of work. And the discipline lays out the process for creating a building committee. But if you're considering building, you ought to look into setting up a consultation with the Wesley Community Development Corporation, based here in our annual conference. Many congregations have worked with them, and they have helped the local churches study their existing property and understand future potential. The slogan at the Wesley CDC is reimagine, repurpose, redevelop. And I'm including a slide that illustrates how the Wesley CDC consulted with two congregations in the Metro District that were merging. So they both had property and land and buildings, and the Wesley CDC helped them to understand what they had and think about these questions. What's God's vision for us? Can we be better together than apart? And no, that wasn't about disaffiliation. This was about two churches coming together and thinking about how by merging they could be stronger. And how can our property assets best serve and reflect the new church that is emerging from our two churches? So you see the land of each church, an overhead view, each property. Wesley CDC worked with them and helped them develop a vision and a plan for making that merger happen and creating a plan to use the no longer needed land to invest in a way that would fund ministry far, far, far into the future, beyond our lifetimes. So it's pretty amazing the work that can be done. And we're encouraged to reach out to Wesley Community CDC in Huntersville if we would like to have a consultation with them about our hopes and our dreams for our property. Big job that we have as trustees is to manage bequests and trusts. May go a long time without having any, and then might have a couple come all at once. There are guidelines in the Book of Discipline. Your own charge conference might have guidelines. We always want to honor the intent of the donor. I think once in a very blue moon, there's an occasion when maybe the intent cannot be honored, and there need to be discussions and negotiations. And there have rarely been examples when trustees were unable to accept gifts because the conditions were impossible for the church to keep. But most of the time it's smooth sailing, and trustees are the ones who handle this at first. They can delegate. Trustees can delegate to a planning committee, to an estate planning committee, an endowment committee, foundation. There could be a memorial committee, but in absent those other groups, it really is the responsibility of the trustees to manage the receipt of a bequest. Usually you get a letter from the clerk of court, an attorney may reach out to you, and you take it from there. You might want to speak to an attorney. The Book of Discipline has guidelines for how we receive and manage gifts, and how we handle the income generated from them. There are some restrictions that are placed on some gifts. So it's an area that is worth studying up on. The trustee guidelines booklet does have a section on managing bequests and trusts. Once again, our good friend Amy Coles, the bishop's assistant, who deals with lots of questions around property, said this: the common property question is, if the church is offered an abandoned lot or a cemetery plot, and the trustees agree to receive it, is a formal process through the district committee on location and building required in order to sell it? And the answer is no. If it's really an in-out situation, notify your district superintendent and get busy selling it if it's your church's intention to sell it. If you sell donated lots or cemetery plots, you can generate funds for church ministry. Yes, there are some cases in which the funds will be restricted certain ways, but lots of times it's not restricted, and your church can decide how to strengthen its ministry and its mission through the sale, the funds that come from the sale of such properties. So just keep that in mind. It's not the same as if you decide to try to sell property, or if you want to buy or build. Always in those cases, you're going to be working with the district committee on location and building and your superintendent. But quick in out for a gift that's not going to be kept, you're in good shape if you want to just sell it quickly. This is a job of the trustees: records retention. Sometimes we get so caught up in the facilities and the legal stuff, we forget that this is pretty important. We have to store and maintain records on a certain schedule, and it is recommended. I know that's microscopic, it's really hard to see. We can find that elsewhere, and definitely this screen is not going to be your friend. It's so small. But look, there's a retention period for just about any kind of record that your church is generating, whether it has to do with your finances, with your property. Of real note is the listing there of the permanent, keep forever things like your deeds, lease agreements, depreciation schedules, so your financial journals, appraisals, of course, your blueprints, your charts, your as-built charts and plans. Those are forever. But many records are not forever. You don't have to keep them forever. At my church right now, the problem is we've kept everything for 97 years. So we have it all, and it gets to be a burden. And we're trying to go through and decide what we really have to keep versus what was just interesting back in the 1920s and 30s, but we don't really need to have them anymore. So we're trying to pay a bit more attention to this record retention schedule ourselves. And I hope you will do the same. And you might need to encourage other groups in the church and other interested parties to be sure that they are doing the right thing and abiding by this retention schedule. It's part of our job as trustees. So, general questions that we might ask. Where are the deeds to all of our property? Ask yourself that. Be sure there's an answer and that you can put your hands on them. And once you know where they are, check. Do you need to change the property titles? Do they need to be updated because you've experienced a merger or an incorporation? All of this can be done locally, but you might need the help of an attorney. It's really important to keep those up to date. It's disheartening if you decide you need to sell a bit of property or something and you go in and you find that nothing was updated and the name of the church was totally different back in 1880. And there's a whole process to establish and get caught up more than 100 years. So to keep things current, and it will help your future trustees at your church when they are doing anything about their property and their land. If you are an incorporated church, where are your articles of incorporation and where is your corporation minutes book? These are very serious. The Secretary of State for the state of North Carolina really expects us to manage the articles of incorporation in our annual meeting and our minutes very appropriately. So take that seriously and be sure you keep those with your very important documents locked up, safe and sound. When was the last time the fire extinguishers were serviced? Now, if you're in a fairly large facility, your local authorities may require you to have a big fire system. Some smaller churches who are not as much under the eye of the authorities like that just need to keep an eye on the extinguishers. They don't last forever. You do want them to work in the event that they are needed. And if they have fused together because they rusted, because the last time was when Grandpa did it in 1973, that will be a sad day. So you want to make sure your fire extinguishers do work when they're needed. And again, if you have a much more complicated system, you're already going to be under a regime of inspection annually and probably giving those inspection reports to a local fire inspector or fire marshal. Other questions you might ask. Where is the safe sanctuary policy adopted by the charge conference? And is it posted and enforced? Every year, the trustees warrant, we say to our district superintendent, yes, in our report, we have a safe sanctuary policy. We have reviewed it. We have had training. We are up to date. Be sure that's the truth and do the work necessary to safeguard the vulnerable populations in your congregation. It isn't just little children. It can be senior citizens. It can be anyone, persons with special needs who are vulnerable. And the safe sanctuary policy does give guidelines for how to make God's house safe for everybody. And we do say every year, yes, we've reviewed it. Yes, it's up to date. Be sure that's true. Have you updated and reviewed your building use policies? And are they approved by the charge conference? I think one of the important parts of our training is to remember that we are accountable to the charge conference and to the church council. And we need to make sure that those are approved by those bodies to which we are accountable. I have said a lot about insurance earlier. Are the trustees reviewing insurance policies annually? Ask yourself. Don't let it just renew on autopilot. There's stuff to look at. Remember earlier, we looked at what the minimum limits of liability have to be. We, again, sign off every year. Our charge conference paperwork, we send it in and say that we are meeting these thresholds. We have to be truthful about that and really do it. I'm sharing this now because as we come closer to 8:30, I want to honor our time commitment. And Shani is keeping track of evaluations. She wants the feedback about all of our sessions. And there's a code you can scan if you need to do it that way using your smartphone. There's also a link. I put that link in the chat as well, but she really does want to hear from the participants in Trustees 101 so that these sessions can get better and better every year. And your feedback is really important. So when I advance the slide, you're going to lose that, but it is in the chat. The link is in the chat. But if you need to take a picture of that QR code, you should do it now, because I want to go to this next page, which is a list of resources that we've talked about tonight. These are the links that are in the chat. The guidelines on allowing an outside group to use or lease the property. It's a sample insurance agreement and hold harmless agreement. Have not talked about it in our meeting, but this is a great agreement to have. You make it your own, you customize it with your church name, and it is an agreement that someone using your building agrees to have a certain amount and type of insurance before they bring themselves to your property and increase your liability. And in the event that something does go wrong, the hold harmless agreement it uses very specific legal language to help protect the church in case of lawsuit. The insurance coverage standards are also a link. If you're really into this legal stuff, the General Counsel on Finance and Administration has an entire page with sections of legal forms. They can be fascinating. I want you to be able to click on the Guidelines for Trustees booklet. You might want to save that, order your own. And then the online version of the Book of Discipline is the very bottom of the slide. I think it's almost off the screen, and I apologize for that. I was trying so hard to squeeze it all in. Yeah, but I didn't make it. The Book of Discipline link is also in the chat earlier on. So it's been a lot of me talking for the past 45 minutes. And I want to take a moment to quit talking and make sure you have a chance to turn your mics on and ask some questions. But I understand as well that some folks will need to finish and go. Before you do, I hope you will complete the evaluation and return it. I'm going to stay on the call for this Zoom meeting for a while, but before we go, I would love to entertain any questions. Also, if you have heard me make a blatant error in something I've said, now's a good time for us to correct that too. But I would love to hear any questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer or point you to a good resource so that you can get a good answer. Do we have questions?
Patrick, you say you are going to put these links in the chat, because I don't see anything there.
All right, y'all, does anybody else see those in the chat? Because I had them in there. If they're not in there, what I'll do is I'll ask Shani to email using the email you registered with for the course, the page with all these resources. And I think we can do that tonight or in the morning at the latest. But when the meeting was starting, I plugged in as many of these to the whole group as I could. I wonder if you join the Zoom after I did that, I wonder if you don't see it. That could be one of those quirky Zoom things. But I definitely want you to have these, so we'll email that page. These are great. I wish I had these. Pulling them together, I realized how important, they are. So I'll do that, and thank you, Michael. I'm going to stop screen sharing. Those links are too long to jot down, so just let me email them to you. Most of those URLs are just so long. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to check the chat. I see some chat that I have not been able to respond to. Definitely want to answer more questions. Not seeing resources. Okay, I think that we'll have to email it. That's what's happened. I think if you join past, that time, you're not going to see them. So I'm sorry about that. Are there any other questions about property or insurance or legal agreements? Be happy to try to help you. Well, my hope and prayer is that you get off to a great start with your board of trustees. I feel confident that I'm reading these notes here. People are not seeing those links. We'll make that happen. I feel confident that you have resources to get yourself equipped for the year. The guidelines is so important. You know, I wonder if at the very least I could put the guidelines in if you didn't get those. So somebody ask a question so that you don't have to listen to me mumbling away here. I'm going to try something right now. I just copied all those resources and I'm going to try to paste them and just see if they go to you. It's going to be a jumble, but they're going to be in there. That looks terrible. Okay. You're going to have to separate some things out, but there are all the links to all the resources we've talked about tonight. I hope that has come through. I have a message from Josh to everyone. Given recent litigation regarding abuse, are you able to speak to things to consider if you have a Boy Scout group allowed to use the facilities? Josh, that's a great question. I think that the Scouts and denomination have worked really hard. I want to get confirmation of what I'm about to say from Amy Coles, Bishop's assistant. But I believe that we have the green light to be entering into charter organization agreements once again, churches who can be charter organizations to Scout troops. There was a period of time when we were asked to put that on hold because the terms had not been ironed out. And the slightly bigger issue is that I do believe ongoing, there is still the bankruptcy case that is very much guiding the abuse allegation settlement process. So there are a lot of things in play nationally, but before you do anything, confirm with Amy Coles. But the last I read is yes, we are able to enter into charter organization agreements and sponsor Scout troops. I hope I'm right. That's what I saw in an email months ago. Good question. Been a hard season coming through that. Some of your churches may have been involved in some of the litigation around allegations of abuse. Are there other questions? I realized there was a problem with the link and some folks jumped in the middle. This is being recorded. You could go back and listen to the beginning. I have listed my email. I did it earlier, but I'm going to put it in the chat right now so that you can email me if I have confused you or if I have said something that intrigued you, or if you have a question and I could perhaps point you in the right direction. I would be happy to do it. I want to hear from you. I'm not hearing other questions. I'm looking back through the chat to see if there are any questions in the chat. I think not. Well, if this is a conclusion, kind of a natural point of conclusion in the evening as it's approaching 8:40, why don't we end now? I want to send you with my blessings and my concern for your ministry of being a trustee in this year ahead and in the years ahead. And I really do hope you'll reach out if I can help in any way. I always reach out and ask for help when I need it. And that we have wonderful resources. If I don't know the answer, we'll get the answer. And I want to thank you for coming to Trustees 101, and don't forget to do the evaluation, and that will make Shawnee very happy. And thank you for your patience with me as I muddle through running a slideshow and managing the waiting room and the chat all by myself. And I'm not Mr. Zoom expert. So God bless you. And I, seeing no other questions in the chat, I don't think anybody's trying to speak. I think we'll just say good night. And again, God bless you. And we'll finish our meeting. Take care. Good night. Bye-bye.